The moment the red wine hit my face, time seemed to stop. Gasps rippled across the Astoria Grand Ballroom as the liquid splashed down my skin, staining my dress in front of 200 stunned guests. I could feel the sticky warmth sliding down my cheek, but what cut deeper was the voice that followed. "Give me the keys, Eleanor. Stop pretending you own what doesn't belong to you. That apartment, that safe, everything you've been hiding. It should be ours now." It was Sienna, my brand new daughter-in-law, clutching a crystal glass with shaking fingers. Her chest heaved, her eyes flashing with a rage that seemed rehearsed. The chandelier lights above caught the crimson streaks dripping from my face, and for a moment, I thought even the grand room itself was holding its breath. I saw the guests' faces, some turning away in shame, others frozen, their phones half raised, not sure if they should record or intervene. And there, only a few steps away, stood Marcus, my son. His lips parted as though to speak, yet no sound came out. I reached for a napkin with steady hands, dabbing at my cheek, then lifted my chin and locked eyes with Sienna. I refused to look small. The orchestra had stopped mid-note, leaving the silence sharp enough to cut glass. Then, without warning, the projector behind the bridal table flickered alive. Bank statements, offshore accounts, coded ledgers stamped with the emblem of Helios Corporation, all splashed across the massive screen. I did not flinch, but I saw Sienna's smirk falter, her hand trembling around the empty glass. In that instant, I knew this was no wedding anymore. This was a trial, and I stood at its center. I rose slowly, the red wine stain still burning across my cheek like war paint. I adjusted my shawl as though I were brushing off dust, not public humiliation. My eyes swept over the ballroom, faces I had known for years now twisted into disbelief, curiosity, or silent judgment. Not one hand had reached out to me. Then Sienna's voice cut through the air again, shrill and sharp. "Stop hiding, Eleanor. You're old. You don't need all that space or those locked boxes. Marcus and I deserve a real start, and you're standing in the way." I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. My fingers slipped into my clutch and closed around the cool surface of my phone. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it out. The murmurs hushed. With a calmness that unsettled them more than Sienna's tantrum, I dialed a number and lifted the phone to my ear. "Victor Navarro," I said clearly, letting my voice carry across the ballroom. "It's time. Bring the file." The reaction was immediate. I saw the flickers of recognition in the room, the unease spreading like wildfire. Victor Navarro was no florist, no family friend. His name floated through country clubs and boardrooms in whispers, tied to financial storms, corporate implosions, legal cleanups that left no survivors. Sienna's smirk faltered, splitting into panic. "What are you doing? You wouldn't dare." But I didn't answer. I closed the phone with a snap, my posture tall, my face unreadable. The guests knew it then. I wasn't the feeble widow they had assumed. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I had done it with a single phone call. The ballroom was no longer a celebration. It had become a battlefield, and I had just summoned my first ally. The ballroom lights flickered once, twice, then everything went black. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by the clink of glasses in the sudden dark. Someone screamed. For a heartbeat, all I could hear was the frantic echo of footsteps across marble. Then, like fireflies in the night, the glow of phones lit up the room, Every device buzzed at once, vibrating across tables and into anxious hands. I watched as guests lowered their eyes, confusion spreading, then shock. On each screen, the same anonymous message flashed. The Vale family has been hiding more than you think. Check the files. Attachments followed, PDFs, spreadsheets, photographs. From where I stood, I saw faces bathed in the cold glow of discovery. Whispers turned to panicked muttering. Offshore accounts. Cayman Islands. Helios Corporation. What is this? When the emergency lights finally hummed to life, the glitter of the Astoria Grand was gone. All that remained was a room heavy with suspicion and fear. Sienna clutched Marcus's arm, her white gown trembling against me, the scarlet stain of wine still burning across my cheek. Then the oak doors swung wide. 2 men in dark suits entered, their badges catching the dim light. FBI, the taller one announced, his tone sharp, commanding. Everyone remain calm. We need to speak with Eleanor Vale immediately. Gasps rippled through the room. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I stood motionless, red wine dripping down my chin. I did not flinch. I did not bow my head. I locked eyes with the agents, steady, unafraid. For decades, I had lived in silence. Tonight, that silence ended. 2.5 years earlier, the first shadow crept into my quiet life. I still remember the knock on my apartment door that evening, the rhythm nervous, uneven, yet familiar. It was the same way Marcus used to knock when he was a boy, hoping I wouldn't scold him for staying out too late. When I opened the door, he stood there with a smile that looked rehearsed, forced. And beside him was a young woman, whose presence filled the narrow hallway, as if the air itself bent around her. "Mom, this is Sienna," Marcus said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. It was the sound he made whenever he wanted my approval. Sienna was beautiful, yes, but it was the kind of beauty polished in a mirror, sharpened like a blade. Silk blouse, diamond pendant, heels clicking like punctuation. Her eyes skimmed over me with the briefest glance, before landing on the apartment itself. I saw them linger on the second-hand sofa, the scuffed coffee table, the pile of gardening magazines. Finally, she smiled, a curve of her lips without warmth. "How cozy," she murmured, her manicured finger tracing the edge of a chipped picture frame. The tone beneath her words was unmistakable, patronizing, amused. I said nothing. I only watched. That night, I cooked Marcus's favorite, roast chicken, the dish I had made for every birthday since he was 12. He ate politely, but his attention was fixed on Sienna. She barely touched her plate, pushing the food around before setting her fork down with a sigh. "I'm watching my figure," she said lightly, but the subtext was sharp. My food, my effort. It wasn't good enough for her. In the weeks that followed, their visits grew more frequent, and with each one, the air in my home felt tighter. Sienna's suggestions became sharper, her tone more insistent. "You should really consider downsizing, Eleanor. A place like this must be too much to manage at your age." Or, "Senior communities are wonderful, safe, convenient. Marcus and I saw one just last week." What stunned me wasn't her words, but Marcus's. My son, once my protector, began echoing her lines like a script rehearsed in secret. "Mom, Sienna's right. Maybe a smaller place would be better for you." Those words cut deeper than all of Sienna's polite barbs. My boy, the one I had raised alone, who once swore he'd take care of me. Step by step, he was drifting into her orbit. The turning point came the night Sienna's parents visited. Leonard Cross, with his banker's handshake and booming voice, and Marjorie, with her cold, elegant poise. They sat in my living room, not as guests, but as evaluators. Their eyes didn't see me. They saw square footage, market value, leverage. It's irresponsible, Leonard declared, for a woman your age to live alone in such a large property. If something happened, who would know? Marjorie leaned in, her tone sweet but sharp as glass. We've researched a senior residence nearby. Medical staff, meals prepared, social events. You'd thrive there. My pulse pounded in my ears. Their lines were too smooth, too coordinated. This wasn't care. It was strategy. I looked at Marcus then, praying to see resistance in his eyes. Instead, I saw compliance. He sat small, quiet, his hands folded like a boy before a teacher. And in that moment, I understood. I was no longer a mother to them. I was property, an asset, a means to an end. That night, I made a vow. They would regret underestimating me. Long before Marcus ever brought Sienna to my door, I had lived another life, one hidden carefully beneath the surface of my modest routines. To the neighbors in my brownstone building, I was the quiet widow who bought discount groceries, drove an aging sedan, and tended roses on my balcony. They had no idea that for 3 decades, I had stood beside a man who built an empire. Richard Vale was no ordinary businessman. On paper, he was nothing more than an executive at a mid-level import company. In reality, he was the architect of Helios Capital, a private investment group that quietly bought and sold energy infrastructure across the country. Richard believed in 2 things: discretion and foresight. Visible wealth is a beacon for vultures, he used to remind me. Invisible wealth is armor. Together, we cultivated that armor, structuring our lives so no one suspected the scale of what we had built. When Richard died, I kept the mask intact. I continued working part-time at the neighborhood library, clipping coupons, wearing clothes a decade old. Even Marcus believed his father had left little more than a pension. I wanted it that way. I knew how money could poison relationships, how it turned children into competitors and spouses into opportunists. Shielding Marcus from that temptation felt like the last gift I could give Richard. But when Sienna entered our lives, I began to see the cracks in my plan. One evening, after an especially strained dinner, I pulled out the mahogany box Richard had left me, a box no one else had ever touched. Inside lay a labyrinth of documents: property deeds, offshore account statements, Helios share certificates. My eyes lingered on the most recent valuation report. My net worth wasn't modest. It was staggering. I closed the box with trembling hands. For years I had kept Marcus in the dark out of love, but that ignorance had left him vulnerable to Sienna's ambition, to her parents' greed. My silence had turned my son into easy prey. That night, I dialed the one man who still knew the truth. Charles Bennett, Richard's former partner, and my discreet advisor. His voice crackled through the line, warm but cautious. "Eleanor, I wondered when you'd reach out again." "They're circling," I whispered, glancing at the window as if the crosses themselves might be listening from the shadows. "Sienna, her parents, even Marcus. They want my apartment, but it won't stop there. I can feel it. Charles didn't hesitate. Then it's time we stop playing defense. Richard didn't build Helios, so you could live in fear of your own family. You still have power, Eleanor. Use it. His words echoed long after the call ended. Power. For years I had buried it, disguised it, hoping to purchase peace through anonymity. But peace had turned into invisibility, and invisibility had made me an easy target. As I sat alone at my kitchen table, I realized something Richard had understood all along. Money is never truly silent. It waits, it listens, and when the time comes, it speaks louder than any accusation. And I was ready, at last, to let it speak. The decision was made in silence, with only the ticking of the kitchen clock as witness. For years, I had bowed my head, made myself small, blended into the background. But that night, I knew I was done hiding. I retrieved the mahogany box once more and spread its contents across the table. Bank ledgers, real estate deeds, encrypted USB drives Richard once told me to keep, in case the world turns against you. For the first time in years, I studied the documents not as a grieving widow, but as the guardian of an empire. Each page reminded me that my life had been more than library shifts and rose bushes. I was sitting on enough power to dismantle the very people who dared to treat me like an obstacle. The first step was proof. Whispers would never be enough against the Cross family's polished charm, or Marcus's blind devotion to Sienna. I needed undeniable evidence, records that tied them directly to their desperation. I opened the envelopes Charles had couriered earlier that week. Inside were investigative reports. The Cross family drowning in debt. Sienna consulting attorneys about guardianship laws. Marcus's signature appearing on preliminary loan applications. Secured against my property. I read each line slowly, and instead of panic, I felt my pulse steady. Betrayal cut deep, but clarity had its own strange calm. By midnight, my dining table resembled a war map. Post-it notes lined timelines. Receipts were pinned under paperweights. Incriminating passages highlighted in bright ink. The pattern sharpened before my eyes. I wasn't paranoid. I was preyed upon. And that realization changed everything. The second step was control. I dialed Charles again, my voice firm this time. Suspend all transfers to Marcus's accounts. Freeze every discretionary fund tied to my name. And Charles, draft the documents to revise my will, effective immediately. He paused. Then I heard him exhale. Eleanor, once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. You'll be declaring war on your own blood. They declared it first, I said simply. The third step was patience. I knew confrontation couldn't happen in the shadows. It had to happen where their masks were strongest. At the wedding, under chandeliers, in front of the very audience they wanted to impress. That would be the moment their greed was revealed for what it truly was. As dawn broke over Manhattan, I gathered the papers into neat stacks, slid them back into the mahogany box, and locked it tight. My reflection in the kitchen window startled me. No longer the fragile widow the world pitied. No longer invisible. For years, I had hidden behind silence. Now, I was something else entirely. A storm waiting for the perfect stage. The Astoria Grand Ballroom shimmered that night, every corner dripping with money's illusion of perfection. Crystal chandeliers spilled light like waterfalls. The jazz quartet by the fountain played smooth notes, and waiters glided between tables balancing champagne flutes, as if nothing could break the evening's harmony. To the 200 guests, it was a flawless Manhattan celebration. wealth on display, prestige dressed in silk and pearls. But I saw something else. I saw masks. Thin, brittle masks, as fragile as the crystal glasses clinking around the room. Marcus sat stiffly at the head table beside Sienna, his laugh strained, his posture too rehearsed. Across from them, the crosses basked in borrowed attention, boasting of business ventures I knew were nothing but sinking ships under the weight of unpaid loans. I stayed quiet, a glass of water before me, untouched. The scarlet stain of the wine Sienna had hurled earlier was gone, scrubbed away. Yet I could still feel whispers darting like daggers through the room. Guests kept stealing glances, some pitying, others wary, as though humiliation might be contagious. I let them wonder. Their unease gave me strength. The first crack came when I noticed a waiter whisper something urgent to the maitre d'. His smile faltered, his back stiffened, and he disappeared toward the lobby. Moments later, the grand doors opened, and in walked Charles Bennett. Not in his usual easy attire, but in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase. The sight drew a ripple through the ballroom. Heads turned, conversations stuttered into silence. I caught Sienna's voice hiss from across the table, sharp and careless. What is he doing here? Charles didn't pause. He came directly to me, bowed slightly, and placed the briefcase on the table. The metallic click of its locks opening rang louder than the music had minutes earlier. I rose slowly, spine straight, the hush of the room folding itself around me. For decades I had been invisible, dismissed as the quiet widow who belonged in the background. Tonight, I felt every eye on me, and for once, I welcomed it. Charles spoke first, his voice carrying with the steady precision of a courtroom attorney. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive this intrusion. At the request of Mrs. Eleanor Vale, some truths must be laid bare tonight. Truths that concern not only this family, but every witness here who has seen her humiliated." Gasps broke like waves. I saw phones tilt discreetly, cameras rising to capture the unraveling of a family portrait. Marcus's face drained of color. Sienna's hand clamped onto his arm, her nails digging crescent moons into his sleeve. I met their eyes, unflinching. My voice felt steady, alive with a power I hadn't used in years. If we are going to play roles, let's play them honestly. Tonight isn't only about vows and champagne. It's about masks slipping. I rested my hand on the briefcase, and it's time mine came off first. With that, I drew out the first document. The storm I had been waiting for was ready to break. My hands did not tremble as I unfolded the first sheet of paper. The silence inside the Astoria Grand was so thick, I could hear the rustle of the page echo like thunder. Dozens of eyes followed me. Neighbors who thought of me as the quiet widow in cardigans. Investors who barely remembered my name. Relatives who pitied me. None of them had ever seen me like this. "This," I said, my voice steady and clear, "is the deed to the Midtown office tower on 47th Street. It generates $52,000 in rent every month. My late husband and I purchased it 15 years ago." Gasps scattered through the room, like sparks in dry brush. I saw recognition flicker in faces from Wall Street, their discomfort at realizing they had walked through that marble lobby countless times. Never knowing it belonged to me, I laid the deed down and pulled another paper. "And this," I continued, "is the Helios Capital Share Certificate. 800,000 units, valued at more than $20 million. shares my husband built, and I have quietly managed since his passing. Murmurs swelled into a roar. Phones lit up, fingers tapping madly. Some were recording, others searching Helios Capital online. The name wasn't unknown. It was a whisper in investment circles, a ghost empire. That I, Eleanor Vale, sat at its core was unthinkable to them. Sienna's mask cracked first. Her voice split the murmurs. She's lying. She's an old woman making up fairy tales. Look at her clothes, her car. She lives like a pauper. I turned my gaze on her, sharp as glass. Appearances are deceiving, my dear. You of all people should know that. The ballroom laughed, hesitant at first, then louder as the irony sank in. Sienna flushed crimson, clutching Marcus's arm like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. At last, my son spoke. "Mom," Marcus stammered, his voice a mix of anger and panic. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why keep this fortune a secret?" His words rang with both accusation and desperation. I looked at him. Sorrow and steel locked together in my heart. Because money changes people, Marcus. I wanted you to grow without its shadow corrupting you. But now I see. My silence left you vulnerable. My silence left you blind. I unfolded the last stack of papers. Bank transfers, credit card bills, rental guarantees. For 3 years, I covered your debts, your rent, even this wedding. Every luxury you paraded was funded by me, though you believed it was your own doing. And yet, instead of gratitude, you conspired to take the one thing I never offered, my home. The words hung like lead. The crosses shifted in their chairs, their proud postures wilting as they sensed the tide turning against them. I straightened, letting my voice drop, cold and final. Tonight, the charade ends. You thought I was powerless. You thought I was disposable. But I am neither. I am Eleanor Vale, and I will not be erased. The sound of my own voice cracked through the ballroom like a judge's gavel. In that instant, I saw it in their faces. The wedding was no longer a celebration. It had become a trial, and the verdict was already in motion. For a moment, the ballroom froze. No one touched their champagne. Eyes flicked from me to the crumbling facade of Marcus and Sienna, as if waiting for the curtain to fall on a play gone wrong. I reached for the thickest folder in the stack, heavier than the rest, and lifted it high. "This," I said, my voice carrying through the silence, "is not about assets. It is about intent." Charles opened the folder and slid out glossy photographs. He handed them to the nearest guests, who passed them hand to hand. I watched their faces shift as they studied each page. Sienna standing with a real estate appraiser outside my apartment. Screenshots of emails planning my transition into assisted living. Financial documents stamped with Marcus's signature on preliminary loans against my property. Each page was another blade. With every glance exchanged, the whispers sharpened until they buzzed across the ballroom like a swarm. Julian Cross shot to his feet, his face red, his voice booming. "This is outrageous. Private documents, no doubt fabricated by a bitter old woman jealous of her son's happiness." I turned to him slowly, calm and unyielding. "Fabricated. These came directly from your daughter's cloud account. Would you like me to read the line where she wrote, 'Once Eleanor is declared incompetent, Marcus will control the deed and will have our foothold in Manhattan real estate?'" The color drained from his cheeks. His wife tried to interject, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The audience gasped, some muttering in disgust. Marcus stepped forward then, pale and desperate. "Mom, please. This isn't what it looks like. I cut him off, my voice sharp as steel. "Don't lie to me, Marcus. I know every account you opened, every loan you pursued. I paid your debts while you plotted to strip me of the one place your father and I built together. You let them twist you into a stranger I no longer recognize." Sienna broke next. She lunged toward me, shrieking, "You think this performance makes you powerful. You're alone, Eleanor. Alone and old. Money doesn't buy loyalty. No one here will side with you." But the silence of the room answered her. Guests avoided her eyes, their disapproval like a weight pressing down. I saw a few nod discreetly toward me, respect flickering where pity once lingered. I held Sienna's gaze. "You are right about one thing. Money doesn't buy loyalty, but it exposes betrayal. And tonight, everyone here has seen yours. Your hunger, your lies, your cruelty." I gathered the papers, closed the folder, and turned to my son. "The inheritance you assumed was yours is gone. Every asset will go to foundations that protect families from predators like you and the people you chose to marry. My name, my legacy, will stand for something greater than enabling greed." The ballroom erupted with murmurs, shock, awe, disbelief. Marcus stood frozen. Sienna collapsed into a chair, the crosses wilted, their empire stripped bare under Manhattan's chandeliers. I, Eleanor Vale, once invisible, had ended them with a single strike. The music never resumed that night. The Astoria Grand, once filled with jazz and laughter, dissolved into heavy silence, broken only by the shuffle of guests leaving in uneasy waves. I watched waiters abandon trays of untouched desserts, photographers quietly packing up their cameras, chandeliers dimming under the weight of scandal. Sienna sat collapsed in her chair, her pristine gown wrinkled, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint turned to ash. Her mother fanned her helplessly, while Julian Cross barked demands at Charles, insisting on explanations no one cared to give. Every word only made them look smaller, more desperate, more exposed. Marcus didn't move. He stood rooted to the floor, his tie hanging loose, his face drained of color. His eyes followed me, though I knew he wasn't really seeing me. He was staring at the wreckage of his own choices. Guests who had once admired him slipped past with curt nods, polite smiles replaced by thin lines of disapproval. In Manhattan society, reputations could crumble faster than fortunes, and his had just collapsed in a single night. I, in contrast, felt calm, measured. I gathered the remaining documents, returned them to the leather briefcase, and nodded to Charles. Together, we walked toward the exit. The hush that followed was no longer pity. It was respect. People parted to let me through. I caught whispers in my wake. All this time. Eleanor Vale. Near the door, I heard my son's voice break. "Mom," Marcus called, ragged and raw, cracking like he was 12 again. "Please, wait. We can fix this. Tell them it isn't true." I stopped but didn't turn. My answer was quiet, almost tender, but final. "The only lie tonight was the one you chose to live, Marcus, and lies have consequences." And with that, I stepped into the cool night air. Outside, Manhattan pulsed as if nothing had changed. Honking taxis, neon reflections shimmering on wet pavement, the smell of roasted nuts from a vendor on the corner. But to me, the city felt different. It felt like it had embraced me, washing away the humiliation of Sienna's whine, the years of silence, the weight of being underestimated. Inside the ballroom, chaos was swelling. The venue manager was already confronting the Crosses, demanding immediate payment for the event. With my guarantee revoked, the $50,000 bill hung over them like an executioner's blade. Julian's bluster turned into shouting, echoing through the half-empty hall. Guests lingered just long enough to watch the spectacle before fleeing, eager to retell the gossip elsewhere. By midnight, Marcus and Sienna were alone at their own reception. The grandeur was reduced to dirty plates and dying candles. The Crosses avoided them, calculating how to salvage what scraps of reputation remained. Marcus buried his head in his hands. Sienna muttered curses, her voice hoarse with rage. Meanwhile, I rode home in silence. The city lights blurred past the car window, but my mind was sharp, clear. For the first time in years, I felt free, no longer weighed down by secrets, no longer confined by appearances. When I turned the key in the lock of my modest brownstone, I knew this night was not an ending. It was my beginning. In the days that followed, Manhattan buzzed like a hive split open. My son's wedding was no longer remembered for chandeliers or gowns, but for the spectacle, the public unmasking of greed, and my refusal to bow. The tabloids feasted on it. I saw the headlines on newsstands as I walked past. Mother-in-law exposes fortune in shocking wedding showdown, and Vale dynasty implodes in ballroom scandal. My face, lined, resolute, was suddenly everywhere. For Marcus and Sienna, the aftermath was suffocating. Friends stopped returning their calls. Business partners dissolved agreements overnight. Even their landlord hinted that their lease might be reconsidered. In a city like New York, built on reputation, theirs had rotted in a single evening. And so, they struck back. The first whispers appeared online, anonymous accounts claiming I had grown unstable after Richard's death. Posts accused me of fabricating stories for sympathy, of living in delusion, while others cared for me out of pity. Hashtags sprouted like weeds. G. Eleanor unhinged. Jean crazy at the wedding. I knew Sienna's hand was behind it. The phrasing was too careful, too rehearsed. Soon, a leaked statement framed my revelation as nothing more than a lonely widow's meltdown. "She's ill," Sienna told a gossip columnist, her voice breaking on cue. "We love her, but she needs help. Last night was her cry for it." Marcus, though clumsier, played his part. I watched him in a local interview, his tie crooked, his hands restless. "My mother has always been erratic with money," he said. "She exaggerates. It comes from paranoia." The word hung like poison in the air, but their story didn't land clean. Clips of the confrontation had already gone viral. Strangers replayed the footage, comparing my calm delivery with their frantic denials. The audience gasping as documents were passed around had become an internet chorus. Side by side, the contrast was damning. My dignity against their desperation. Still, the smear campaign left bruises. Neighbors eyed me differently when I walked to the corner store. At the library, a couple shifted away when I sat near them. The sting of rumor was sharp, cruel in ways money could never shield. But I did not flinch. I had expected retaliation. At my kitchen table, I clipped every article, cataloged each online post, building a meticulous archive of their slander. Charles urged me to ignore it. "You don't need to dignify lies," he said, But I shook my head. They want me silent. Silence is what let them believe they could own me. Not anymore. My resolve hardened the evening I saw Marcus on television, parroting their lines, his eyes hollow. This was not the boy I had raised with bedtime stories and pancakes on Sundays. This was a man so desperate to save face, he would strip me of dignity to do it. I closed my notebook and whispered aloud, "If they want a war of words, I'll give them one. But mine will be backed by truth." Have 3. Fan for Ingoi ke tunhat 502. If Marcus and Sienna thought whispers could bury me, they underestimated the woman who had spent decades quietly mastering discretion. Within a week, their smear campaign began to unravel, not in court, but in the court of public opinion. Charles moved swiftly. He arranged for the original Helios Capital documents to be verified by an independent firm. Their report, splashed across the press, confirmed every detail. I was not delusional, nor a widow lost in fantasy. I was the majority shareholder of assets worth millions. Then came the videos. Guests from the wedding uploaded longer, unedited clips. The world saw me calm and collected, presenting paperwork while Sienna shrieked and Marcus pleaded. Overnight, hashtags flipped, "Yes, Team Eleanor." She knew the truth at the wedding. Morning shows debated whether my actions were radical or righteous, but every panelist agreed. The composure in my voice was undeniable. I stayed silent in public, deliberately. "Let them talk," I told Charles as we shared tea at my kitchen table. "Every word they speak digs their own grave. My time will come." And it did. 2 weeks later, the New York Ledger published an exposé titled "The Cross Illusion." Page after page detailed unpaid loans, failed ventures, lawsuits hidden under shell companies. Sienna's image as a polished consultant disintegrated. Marcus's complicity, his signatures on loan applications, was undeniable, printed in black and white for the world to see. The fallout was swift. The Cross family's social circle evaporated. Investors withdrew. Invitations vanished. Even their so-called allies abandoned them, unwilling to risk the stench of association. For me, vindication didn't come in headlines. It came in smaller, quieter shifts. Neighbors who once avoided me now stopped with loaves of bread. Strangers mailed handwritten notes of thanks. One afternoon outside the library, a young woman approached me and whispered, "You gave me the courage to tell my parents no." But the most piercing moment came when Marcus showed up at my brownstone. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "Mom," he said, barely audible, "they've all turned on us. I don't know what to do." I looked at him for a long time. My heart ached. He was still my son, but I did not falter. "Then learn," I said softly. "Learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet. I cannot carry you anymore." He lowered his head, silent, and turned away. And with that, I knew. The war of lies had ended. Not with vengeance, not with shouts, but with truth. Quiet, patient, undeniable truth. 6 months later, the memory of that night at the Astoria Grand had not faded. It had grown into legend in New York City, where scandals usually burn out in the rush of the next headline. My story lingered. Talk shows dissected it. Podcasts replayed it. Professors referenced it in their ethics courses. I had changed too. The woman who once hunched her shoulders in the grocery line, who blended into the wallpaper of her own neighborhood, was gone. Now I walked upright, my silver hair pinned neatly, my eyes meeting the world without apology. Strangers recognized me on the street. Some stopped to say thank you, others only nodded, but their acknowledgement carried weight. I was not a celebrity. I was something rarer. I had become a symbol. Invitations arrived daily. Women's organizations wanted me to speak on financial independence. Universities requested lectures on hidden elder abuse. Journalists pitched book deals and documentaries. At first, I resisted. I had never wanted the spotlight. My life had been built on discretion, on the safety of silence. But then came one letter. It was handwritten, shaky but clear. Mrs. Vale, my daughter tried to force me into selling my house so she could pay her debts. I saw your story, and I finally had the courage to say no. Thank you for proving I'm not weak, just because I'm old. I cried when I read it, and I knew then. My silence had shielded my family for years, but my voice could shield countless others. So, I agreed to my first interview on national television. Under the harsh studio lights, I told my story with the same calm I had shown in the ballroom. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I simply laid out the truth. How small manipulations grow into control. How love can be twisted into leverage. How dignity must never be bartered away. The response stunned me. Calls to elder support hotlines surged. Donations flooded into advocacy groups. Women and men wrote letters saying they finally had the courage to draw boundaries. I, Eleanor Vale, the invisible widow, had ignited something larger than myself. Meanwhile, Marcus and Sienna lived in the shadows of a different story. Their apartment lease was revoked. Creditors circled like wolves. Sienna's so-called consulting business collapsed under the glare of bad press. Each time she tried to rebuild, she found me there. My face on a book cover, in a news article, on a conference poster. The contrast was unbearable. Marcus struggled to hold work. His resume was tainted by whispers of betrayal. Employers questioned his reliability. Former friends pretended not to see him at events. He turned to drinking. The son I once knew in pressed suits now staggered in wrinkled shirts, smelling of defeat. Sienna, bitter and restless, poured her venom into online posts, each one ignored by a public that no longer believed her. One evening, as I left a community center after giving a talk, I saw him. Marcus stood outside a rundown bar, a cigarette trembling between his fingers. For a moment, our eyes met across the street. He looked away first. My heart clenched, but I did not cross. Some lessons cannot be taught by saving. They must be lived in the ruins of one's choices. Back in my apartment, I poured tea and opened my notebook. On its pages, sketches for a foundation were taking shape. A network to protect seniors from financial predators. For the first time in years, I felt not just free, but purposeful. That night, I understood. My life had split in two at the Astoria Grand. The woman I had been, and the woman I had become. And I would never go back. The idea for the foundation was born at my kitchen table. The same table where, months earlier, I had spread out papers in fear of losing everything. But this time, fear had no place, only determination. Before me lay a folder stuffed with letters, emails, and handwritten notes from strangers all across the country. Each message carried the same theme. Thank you for speaking when I could not. Reading them, I realized my story was no longer just mine. It had become a mirror for thousands who had endured their own betrayals in silence. That night, I wrote the words at the top of a yellow legal pad, "The Eleanor Vale Foundation for Senior Dignity." With Charles guiding me, the idea quickly took shape. He introduced me to attorneys who specialized in nonprofit law, accountants willing to volunteer, activists eager to lend their voices. Within 3 months, the foundation was official. Its mission was simple, almost radical: to protect seniors from financial exploitation, whether by strangers, corporations, or, most painfully, family. We launched at the New York Public Library, a place symbolic to me, both as a former librarian and as a citizen of this city. Standing at the podium, flanked by banners that read, "Dignity has no expiration date," I felt my voice steady as cameras clicked. "For too long," I said, "we have treated age as weakness. But growing older does not erase our right to independence, to respect, to choice. I know what it feels like to be targeted by those you love, and I know the strength it takes to say no. This foundation exists, so no one has to say it alone." The speech went viral overnight. Donations poured in. A retired teacher in Kansas mailed $5 with a note that read, "This is all I can spare, but I want to be part of this." A Silicon Valley entrepreneur wired $1 million, confessing that his mother had once been swindled by her own relatives. With that support, we built a team. Lawyers offered pro bono consultations to seniors facing predatory contracts. Social workers visited those pressured into selling their homes. Hotlines were staffed around the clock. Volunteers trained to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation. Within 6 months, we had already assisted over 400 families. But I wasn't content to stop there. I accepted invitations to Washington, where I testified before congressional committees about the loopholes that left elders vulnerable. I spoke plainly, without theatrics, describing how subtle persuasion can snowball into coercion, how care can disguise control. My testimony helped push forward legislation that required stricter oversight of guardianship petitions and harsher penalties for financial abuse. The media branded me the voice of dignity. My face appeared on magazine covers, not in glamorous gowns, but in simple blazers, hair-pinned, eyes resolute. Morning shows introduced me as proof that it is never too late to begin again, never too late to fight back. But fame never changed me. I still lived in my brownstone. I still walked to the corner bakery. I still tended my roses on the balcony. Neighbors who once pitied me now waved in admiration. Children shouted my name as if I were some neighborhood hero. At our headquarters, a donated floor in Midtown from a grateful family we had helped, I often stayed late into the night, reviewing case files with young staffers. I insisted on writing personal notes to those we supported. "You are not alone. You are stronger than you believe." One evening, after speaking to a crowd of 2,000 at a senior advocacy summit in Chicago, I sat backstage, exhausted but fulfilled. Charles handed me a bottle of water and said softly, "Richard would be proud." I looked out at the audience still applauding, banners with my name fluttering. "No," I corrected gently. "Richard would be relieved. Because for the first time, I'm using everything we built for what it was meant to do." The foundation was no longer just an organization. It had become a lifeline, a shield, a rallying cry. And at its center stood me, Eleanor Vale. Once underestimated, humiliated, nearly erased. Now proof that dignity once reclaimed, can change the world. The idea of writing my story didn't come from me. It arrived, as turning points often did in my life, from someone unexpected. Her name was Naomi Park, a young journalist who had been following the early work of the Vale Foundation. She had covered our cases, written small features about the seniors we helped, and sometimes sent me thoughtful notes after an event. One crisp October afternoon, she appeared at my brownstone with a notebook tucked under her arm and urgency in her eyes. Over tea at my kitchen table, she said, "You've changed so many lives, but people don't really know you. They only see the speeches, the press conferences, the foundation updates. They need your truth. Messy, raw, start to finish." I chuckled at the suggestion. For decades I had hidden in plain sight, cultivating invisibility as carefully as some tend roses. Even now, after the ballroom, after the headlines, I preferred to let the work speak louder than my name. But Naomi pressed gently. "Policy changes minds," she said, "but stories change hearts. Your story could give strength to people who are still too scared to speak." That night, I sat at my desk with a blank notebook. For the first time in years, I wrote not checks or directives, but memories. I began with Richard, the man who taught me that invisible wealth was safer than visible fortune. I wrote about our first apartment in Queens, the nights we planned investments on scraps of paper, the laughter that echoed through rooms too small to hold our dreams. I wrote about Marcus as a boy, how he clung to my hand at the zoo, how he once fell asleep during Mary Poppins with popcorn still in his fist. I wrote about the ache of Richard's death, the silence that swallowed me whole afterward, the years when I folded myself into the background. And of course, I wrote about the night under the chandeliers of the Astoria Grand, when silence finally shattered. The process was grueling. Some nights I cried so hard I couldn't see the page. Other nights, I laughed at the smallest details I had long forgotten. Marcus's crooked tooth, Richard's terrible singing voice, my first attempt at baking bread that ended with smoke alarms blaring. Writing gave me back pieces of myself I thought had been buried. Naomi edited with care, never erasing my voice. Together we shaped the manuscript into Invisible No More. When it was published, the response stunned me. Bookstores filled with readers, young professionals, retirees, even teenagers, eager to hear not the scandal, but the steady, unflinching truth. At signings, people leaned across tables, whispering, "You told my story." I thought I was alone. Critics praised the book for its candor. Newspapers called it a manifesto disguised as memoir. Professors added it to their courses on ethics, sociology, gerontology. Talk shows invited me to speak, my calm tone carrying further than any headline ever had. I signed copies carefully, often adding personal notes. "Your dignity is yours to guard." The success was surreal. I had once dreaded attention, yet now I found myself a cultural symbol. But beneath every ovation lingered an ache no spotlight could erase. Marcus. I had not seen my son in over a year. Rumors trickled in through whispers. He had lost jobs, drifted from apartment to apartment, spiraled deeper into instability. Then came the hardest rumor. He was now a father. My grandson had been born, a boy I had never held, never even seen. One night, after a book reading in Boston, I returned to my hotel overlooking the Charles River. Applause from earlier still echoed faintly, but my heart was elsewhere. I imagined a child's laugh, impossibly small fingers wrapping around mine, the chance to offer love not tainted by greed or resentment, but reality held firm. Marcus had not reached out. The boy likely didn't even know my name. Still, I had set aside a trust fund in the child's name. Not for Marcus. His betrayal had cost him that. But for the boy, my silent promise was simple. Innocence would not pay for the sins of its parents. Whether or not I ever met him, my grandson would know opportunity. Yet the questions haunted me. Would Marcus ever return? Not for money, but for forgiveness. Would that child one day knock on my door, curious about the grandmother who chose dignity over silence? I could not know. What I did know was this. The words I had once hidden now belonged to the world. And as long as I kept writing, speaking, and building, fewer mothers would face those questions alone. 2 years have passed since that night at the Astoria Grand, and I have turned 70 with more vigor than I ever imagined. The woman who once hid behind silence has become the face of a movement. What began at my kitchen table with a handful of volunteers has grown into the Invisible Wealth Project, a national network of legal aid, advocacy, and education programs protecting seniors from financial abuse. My mornings are often spent in Washington, sitting across from senators and policymakers. I press for laws that will close loopholes and punish exploitation. I've learned to walk the marble halls of Capitol Hill with the same steady resolve I once carried into a grocery store when every penny mattered. By afternoon, I am back in New York, where our 3rd regional center has just opened. The waiting room is always full. Men and women who, like me, were silent for too long and are finally ready to speak. Each story reminds me why I chose to step out of the shadows. The transformation is not only professional, but deeply personal. My health has improved. My sleep is sound. My laughter freer. I am surrounded by chosen family. Joseph, my neighbor who became an ally. Lucy, now our education director. And Amelia, my closest confidant. At 70, I have learned that life is not winding down. It is expanding. I am no longer invisible. I am one voice among thousands, rewriting what it means to grow old in America. Beyond the speeches and the long days on Capitol Hill, my life has settled into a rhythm I never thought possible in my 70s. Each morning begins on the balcony of my Brooklyn brownstone, a cup of black coffee in my hand, the hum of the city rising beneath me. Joseph arrives with a bag of fresh bagels, as he always does. We've built a ritual together, sharing stories, reading the paper, sometimes bickering over crossword puzzles, as if we'd been neighbors our whole lives. Lucy moved into the apartment next door after her divorce, and her presence has filled the hallway with light. Together, she and I turned the narrow space between our doors into a corridor of laughter, shared meals, and late-night conversations about teaching, resilience, and the odd way life sometimes has to fall apart before it comes together. And then there is Amelia, still my fiercest ally, who joins us for Sunday dinners. The 3 of us cook like family. Pasta, stews, recipes passed down from mothers and grandmothers. My kitchen, once quiet, now pulses with warmth, voices overlapping, pots clattering, laughter spilling past midnight. We call ourselves a chosen family, and I have come to embrace that phrase with all my heart. In those moments, I feel no lack. I no longer measure love by blood ties, but by loyalty, respect, and laughter shared across a crowded table. What I lost in Marcus, I have found, multiplied, in those who chose to stay. And in that discovery, I finally understood peace. On quiet nights, when the city settles into silence, my thoughts return to Marcus. I wonder where he is now, whether he's working, whether the boy, my grandson, is healthy and laughing somewhere I cannot see. I picture him often, not as the child I once held, but as a young man I have never met. Does he have Marcus's dark eyes, Richard's smile? Does he even know my name? That emptiness is the hardest. No award, no headline can fill it. I created a trust for him, a silent promise that he will not carry the burden of his parents' mistakes. Whether or not I ever meet him, he will know opportunity. That is the only gift I can give across the distance. And yet, one question lingers. Will Marcus ever return? Not for money, but for forgiveness. Will the boy someday knock on my door, seeking the grandmother who chose dignity over silence? What do you think? Should I forgive my son if he comes back? Or are some wounds too deep to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next chapter.